Old Mr. Rabbit's Thanksgiving Dinner by Carolyn Bailey. Old Man Rabbit sat at the door of his little house, eating a nice, ripe, juicy turnip. It was a cold, frosty day, but Old Man Rabbit was all wrapped up round and round with yards and yards of his best red wool muffler. So he didn't care if the wind whistled through his whiskers and blew his ears up straight. Old Man Rabbit had been exercising too, and that was another reason why he was so nice and warm. Early in the morning, he had started off flippity-clippity down the little brown path that lay in front of his house and led to Farmer Dyer's corn patch. The path was all covered with shiny red leaves. Old Man Rabbit scuffled through them and carried a great big bag over his back. In the corn patch, he found 2 or 3 fat red ears of corns that Farmer Dyer had missed, so he dropped them into his bag. A little farther along, he found some purple turnips and some yellow carrots and quite a few russet apples that Farmer Dyer had arranged in little piles in the orchard. Old Man Rabbit went in the barn, squeezing under the big front door by making himself very flat, and he filled all the chinks in his bag with potatoes. And he took a couple of eggs in his paws, for he thought he might want to stir up a little pudding for himself before the day was over. Then Old Man Rabbit started off home again, while the little brown path, his mouth watering every time his bag bumped against his back, and not meeting anyone on the way because it was so very early in the morning. When he came to the little house, he emptied his bag and arranged all his harvest in piles in his front room. The corn in one pile, the carrots in one pile, the turnips in another pile, and the apples and potatoes in the last pile. He beat up his eggs and stirred some flour with them and filled it full of currants to make a pudding. And when he had put his pudding in a bag and set it boiling on the stove, he went outside to sit a while and eat a turnip, thinking all the time what a mighty fine old rabbit he was, and so clever too. While Mr. Old Man Rabbit was sitting there in front of his little house, wrapped up in his little red muffler and munching the turnip, he heard a little noise in the leaves. It was Billy Chipmunk traveling home to the stone wall where he lived. He was hurrying and blowing on his paws to keep them warm. "Good morning, Billy Chipmunk," said Old Man Rabbit. "Why are you running so fast?" "Because I am cold and I am hungry," answered Billy Chipmunk. "It's going to be a hard winter, a very hard winter. No apples left. I've been looking all morning for an apple, and I couldn't find one." And with that, Billy Chipmunk went chattering by, his fur standing straight out in the wind. No sooner had he passed than Old Man Rabbit saw Molly Mouse creeping along the little brown path, her long gray tail rustling through the red leaves as she went. "Good morning, Molly Mouse," said Old Man Rabbit. "Good morning," answered Molly Mouse in a weak little voice. "You look a little unhappy," said Old Man Rabbit, taking another bite of his turnip. "I've been looking and looking for an ear of corn," said Molly in a sad little chirping voice. "But the corn has all been harvested. It's going to be a very hard winter, a very hard winter." And Molly Mouse trotted by out of sight. Pretty soon Old Man Rabbit heard somebody else coming along by his house. This time it was Tommy Chickadee, hopping by and making a great to-do, chattering and scolding as he came. "Good morning, Tommy Chickadee," said Old Man Rabbit. But Tommy Chickadee was too much put out about something to remember his manners. He just chirped and scolded because he was very cold and he couldn't find a single crumb or a berry or anything at all to eat. Then he flew away, his feathers puffed out with the cold until he looked like a round ball, and all the way he chattered and scolded more and more. Old Man Rabbit finished his turnip, eating every single bite of it, even to the leaves. Then he went into the house to poke the fire in the stove and to see how the pudding was cooking. It was doing very well indeed, bumping against the pot as it bubbled and boiled and smelling very fine indeed. Old Man Rabbit looked around his house at the corn and the carrots and the turnips and the apples and the potatoes, and then he had an idea. It was a very funny idea, different from any other idea Old Man Rabbit had ever had before in all his life. It made him scratch his head and his left hind foot and think and wonder. But it pleased him too. It was such a very funny idea. First he took off his muffler, and then he put on his apron. He took his best red tablecloth from the drawer and put it on this table, and then he set the table with his gold-banded china dinner set. By the time he had done all this, the pudding was boiled. So he lifted it, all sweet and steaming, from the kettle, and it set in the middle of the table. Around the pudding, Old Man Rabbit piled the heaps and heaps of corn and carrots and turnips and apples and potatoes. And then he took down his dinner bell that was all rusty because Old Man Rabbit had very seldom rung it before, and he stood in his front door and rang it very hard, calling in a loud voice, "Dinner's ready! Come to dinner! Billy Chipmunk, Molly Mouse, Tommy Chickadee!" They all came, and they brought their friends with them. Tommy Chickadee brought Rusty Robin, who had a broken wing and had not been able to fly south for the winter. Billy Chipmunk brought Chatterchee, a lame squirrel, whom he had invited to share his hole for a few months. And Molly Mouse brought a young gentleman field mouse, who was very distinguished looking because of his long whiskers. When they all tumbled into Old Man Rabbit's house and saw the table with the pudding in the center, they forgot their manners and began eating as fast as they could, every one of them. It kept Old Man Rabbit very busy waiting on them. He gave all the currants from the pudding to Tommy Chickadee and Rusty Robin. He selected juicy turnips for Molly Mouse and her friend, and the largest apples for Billy Chipmunk. Old Man Rabbit was so busy that he didn't have any time to eat a bite of dinner for himself. But he didn't mind that, not one single bit. It made him feel so warm and full inside just to see the others eating. When the dinner was over and not one single crumb was left on the table, Tommy Chickadee popped up on his back of his chair and chirped, "3 cheers for Old Man Rabbit's Thanksgiving dinner! Hurrah! Hurrah!" They all twittered and chirped and chattered. And Old Man Rabbit was so surprised that he didn't get over it for a week. You see, he had really given a Thanksgiving dinner without knowing that it really and truly was Thanksgiving Day. The end. I got to read that again, sorry.